There is a puppeteer controlling your life right now. You can't see the strings. You can't feel them being pulled. But every time your mood collapses because of a single text message, every time you spend 3 hours mentally replaying a 30-second conversation, every time you twist yourself into someone you don't recognize just to keep another person comfortable, those strings are being pulled. Hard. And here's the part that will either set you free or destroy you. You handed them the scissors, you built the puppet, you invited the puppeteer in. The person holding your strings might be your mother, your ex, your boss, a stranger who left a comment on your post, or a version of yourself you formed at age 9 when someone made you feel like you weren't enough. It doesn't matter who they are. What matters is this: you gave them that power, and you can take it back. But not the way most people think. Most people believe emotional freedom means not caring. They think detachment is a wall. They think strength means going cold, going numb, going silent. They try to build armor by shutting down and wonder why they still feel controlled, why they still lie awake at 2 a.m. replaying conversations, why a single raised eyebrow from someone they barely know can ruin an entire afternoon. That's not freedom. That's just a more sophisticated cage. What you're about to read is different. This is not a philosophy lecture. This is not a collection of motivational quotes. This is a complete psychological system, built from the ground up, to transform the way your mind processes people, opinions, criticism, rejection, and chaos. By the time you reach the final page, you will not be the same person who started reading. You will understand why your brain was literally wired to make you emotionally dependent and how to rewire it. You will learn the specific mindset shifts that separate people who are controlled by life from people who create it. You will discover practical, battle-tested strategies for dealing with manipulators, energy drains, toxic workplaces, and difficult relationships without losing a single drop of your inner peace. This is about emotional sovereignty, the absolute, unshakable ownership of your own internal world. Are you ready to claim it? Let's begin. The invisible prison. You are living inside a prison that has no walls, no guards, and no locks. The prison is built entirely from your need to be understood, accepted, and approved of by other people. And because there are no visible bars, most people never even realize they're trapped. They just feel the weight of it, the constant low-level anxiety, the exhaustion of managing everyone else's feelings, the strange hollowness of achieving things that somehow never feel like enough. Here is the first truth you need to face. Emotional attachment is not the same as love. It is fear wearing love's clothes. When you are emotionally attached, truly attached in the unhealthy sense, you don't experience people and situations as they are. You experience them through the filter of what you need them to be. You need the relationship to last, because being alone feels like proof of your inadequacy. You need the approval, because without it, the silence feels like rejection. You need the outcome to go a certain way, because if it doesn't, some old wound reopens and reminds you of every time you weren't chosen. This is not connection. This is dependency with better lighting. Scan your daily life honestly. Count the moments in a single week when your emotional state shifted based entirely on someone else's behavior. The colleague who didn't respond to your message the way you expected. The family member who made a comment that you're still thinking about 4 days later, the acquaintance who didn't acknowledge your achievement, the stranger online who disagreed with something you shared. How much of your mental energy, the most precious resource you possess, is being spent processing, analyzing, managing, and reacting to other people? If you're honest, the number is staggering. And here's what makes this so quietly devastating. The most high-functioning, high-achieving people on the planet share one trait above all others. They have learned to be emotionally independent, not cold, not disconnected, not indifferent, independent. Their confidence doesn't rise and fall with external feedback. Their peace doesn't depend on how others behave. Their direction isn't determined by who approves. They have mastered what most people spend their entire lives accidentally avoiding: the ability to feel without being controlled by what they feel. Think about the leaders, creators, and visionaries you admire most. Watch how they handle criticism. Notice how they respond to failure. Observe what happens when someone publicly challenges or mocks them. There is something operating in them that is different from the average reaction. It isn't that they don't notice. It's that the noticing doesn't destabilize them. The comment lands, they observe it, they extract whatever is useful, and they continue moving. That capacity is not a gift. It is a skill, and it is trainable. But here is where most people stumble. They confuse emotional detachment with emotional suppression. They think becoming free means becoming hollow. They imagine the detached person as someone who has simply turned down the volume on their humanity. Complete misunderstanding. True emotional detachment is the opposite of suppression. It is the full experience of emotion without the automatic, unquestioned belief that the emotion is a command. It means you can feel the sting of criticism without believing the criticism defines you. You can experience the fear of rejection without letting that fear dictate your next move. You can notice the pull toward seeking approval without surrendering to it. This is what emotional freedom actually feels like. You feel everything. You are controlled by nothing. The invisible prison exists because of a lie you've been told, and then spent years reinforcing, about how human worth works. The lie says your value fluctuates. It goes up when people approve of you. It drops when they don't. It rises with achievement. It falls with failure. It grows when you are chosen. It shrinks when you are overlooked. Every one of those sentences is false. Your worth does not change. It cannot change. It is not a performance metric. It is not a social score. It is not a reward for excellence or a punishment for imperfection. You were not born needing to earn the right to exist. That idea, that your value is something you have to constantly prove, is the foundation of the prison. And dismantling it starts right here. How the cage was built. No one builds an emotional prison overnight. Yours was constructed slowly, methodically, across years, sometimes decades, by experiences that taught you a series of lessons you never consciously agreed to learn. Let me walk you through a day in the life of someone living inside that cage, not to make you feel worse, but because you cannot dismantle something you can't clearly see. The alarm goes off. Before your feet touch the floor, your hand reaches for your phone. You're not checking the time. You're scanning, looking for evidence. A message that proves someone thought about you. A notification that confirms you matter. A reaction to something you posted last night. If the evidence is there, there's a quiet chemical reward. A small hit of relief that passes itself off as happiness. If it isn't, there's a subtle drop in your baseline, a faint hunger that sets the emotional tone for the entire morning. You move through your day in a continuous state of monitoring. Not consciously. It happens below the level of deliberate thought, like background software running constantly, consuming memory you don't realize is being used, scanning faces for signs of approval or disappointment, replaying conversations for clues about how you came across, pre-editing what you're about to say based on how you predict it will be received. By late afternoon, you haven't faced a single catastrophe. You haven't had an argument or received devastating news, but you are exhausted in a way that has no obvious explanation, because the exhaustion doesn't come from what happened. It comes from the energy spent managing your image inside other people's minds. An image you can't even see and will never fully control. This is the cage, and it wasn't built by your enemies. It was built by the people who raised you, shaped you, and taught you, however unintentionally, that love was something you had to earn by performing correctly. That acceptance was the reward for behavior that didn't make others uncomfortable. That your job in relationships was to manage other people's emotional states before tending to your own. These lessons arrived before you had the cognitive tools to question them. You didn't choose to believe them. You absorbed them the way children absorb everything, completely, uncritically, and permanently, until someone teaches you otherwise. The result is a nervous system trained for surveillance, an identity built on external feedback, a self-worth that is essentially rented, borrowed from whoever happens to be in the room and returned the moment they leave. Here is the specific mechanism. Your sense of value became tied to a single, deeply unreliable source, other people's reactions. And because other people's reactions are entirely beyond your control, shaped by their mood, their history, their insecurities, their bad morning, you created a permanent state of low-grade anxiety trying to manage the unmanageable. You became a people-pleaser, not because you are weak or cowardly, but because you were taught that your safety depended on other people being okay with you. And that lesson, absorbed early, enough, doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like a fact about how the world works. But it isn't a fact. It is a story. A very old, very loud story. And the moment you begin to question it, really question it, the cage starts to loosen. Here is what else that story cost you. It made you easy to manipulate. Not because you're naive, but because when someone knows that your emotional stability depends on their approval, they have leverage. They don't even have to know they have it. They exercise it just by existing, by being warm or cold, by including you or leaving you out, by agreeing or disagreeing. You chase the warmth and flee the cold without ever stopping to ask why someone else's temperature should have this much power over your internal climate. The moment you truly understand this, not intellectually, but in your body, in the quiet place where you actually experience your own life, something begins to shift. The cage doesn't disappear immediately, but you see it for what it is, a structure built from beliefs, and beliefs, unlike walls, can be dismantled. The neuroscience of losing control. To rebuild your emotional architecture, you need to understand why it collapsed in the first place, and the answer is biological before it is psychological. Your brain contains a structure called the amygdala, an ancient alarm system that predates language, logic, and every philosophical idea you've ever encountered. Its job is survival. Its method is speed. When it detects what it interprets as a threat, it doesn't wait for your rational mind to weigh the evidence and render a verdict. It fires immediately, flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing you to fight, flee, or freeze. This system saved your ancestors' lives. When the threat was a predator, an enemy tribe, or a collapsing shelter, the speed of that response was the difference between living and dying. Here is the problem. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a lion and a LinkedIn comment. To your alarm system, social threat and physical threat register almost identically. Being excluded, criticized, rejected, or humiliated activates the same neural circuitry as being physically attacked. This is not metaphor. Brain imaging studies show that social pain and physical pain share overlapping neural pathways. The sting of rejection is, neurologically speaking, a form of pain. This means that when someone criticizes you and you feel your chest tighten, your thoughts race, and your mood collapse. You are not being oversensitive. You are being human. Your nervous system is responding exactly as it was designed to respond. But here is the critical insight that most people never reach. Designed to respond is not the same as required to obey. The alarm fires. That is automatic. What happens next is not. Between the alarm and the action, there is a gap. In most people, that gap is so small it's essentially invisible. The alarm fires and the reaction happens before conscious awareness has entered the room. But that gap exists, and it can be expanded. With practice, with intention, and with the right understanding of what's actually happening inside you, that gap can become large enough to drive your entire life through. This expansion of the gap between stimulus and response is the entire project of emotional detachment, not the elimination of the alarm, not the suppression of the feeling, the creation of space. Enough space to choose. The other neurological factor worth understanding is the dopamine loop. Every time you receive social approval, a compliment, a like, a warm response, someone's face lighting up because of something you did, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in every form of addictive behavior known to psychology. This is not an accident. Human beings survived in groups. Groups required cooperation, and cooperation required social reward systems to enforce it. The brain learned to make social acceptance feel chemically good and social rejection feel chemically painful. This system was functional and necessary in the environment it evolved for. But in a world with social media, performance reviews, comment sections, and constant comparative visibility, this system has become a source of chronic suffering. You don't just occasionally receive social feedback. You are saturated in it, drowning in it, constantly calibrated by it, and your ancient brain responds to each data point as if your survival depends on the outcome. Understanding this does something powerful. It removes the shame. You are not pathetic for caring what people think. You are not weak for feeling destabilized by rejection. You are not broken for wanting approval. These are not character flaws. They are the predictable outputs of a biological system operating in an environment it was never designed for. The question is not whether you were built this way. You were. The question is whether you are going to remain at the mercy of architecture you inherited, or whether you are going to consciously redesign it. Metacognition is the technical term for the capacity to observe your own thinking, to step outside a thought or feeling and examine it the way a scientist examines a specimen, with curiosity rather than identification, with interest rather than ownership. When you develop metacognition, something remarkable happens. You stop being your emotions and start observing them. Instead of, "I am anxious," you discover there is anxiety present. Instead of, "I am humiliated," you find, "I notice the sensation of humiliation moving through me." This linguistic shift, subtle on the surface, represents a seismic reorganization of your relationship to your internal world. The emotion is real. The feeling is genuine. But you are no longer identical to it. And in that distinction lies the first true glimpse of freedom. The 6 shifts that change everything. Understanding the problem is not the same as solving it. The bridge between insight and transformation is built from specific, deliberate changes in how you think, not occasionally, but as a default operating mode. These are not mindset tips. They are identity-level rewrites. Each one, fully integrated, fundamentally alters how you experience your own life. Shift 1. From external evidence to internal authority. Right now, you are using other people as a mirror. You look at their responses to you and use what you see to determine your own reflection, your value, your competence, your likability, your worth. The problem with this mirror is that it distorts. It shifts based on the mirror holder's mood, history, needs, and perception. You are measuring something constant with an instrument that never gives the same reading twice. The shift is this. You become the primary source of your own self-assessment. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is an inflated self-assessment that exists to compensate for a secretly deflated one. What we're describing is something quieter and more durable, a settled, evidence-based recognition of your own value that does not require external confirmation to remain stable. You develop this by doing the internal work that most people outsource, regularly noticing what you did well, acknowledging your effort without waiting for recognition, holding yourself to standards you define rather than standards you inherited, and building a private record of your own competence that isn't visible to anyone else and doesn't need to be. Shift 2. From needing to be, like to tolerating being disliked. The hunger for universal approval is one of the most effective ways to guarantee a life of diminished authenticity. When being liked by everyone becomes your goal, the only strategy that serves it is becoming no one in particular, a social chameleon so adapted to each audience that no consistent self remains. The shift is not about provoking disapproval, it is about tolerating it without collapse. When you can receive someone's dislike, disagreement, or disapproval and remain fundamentally stable, not indifferent, not performatively unbothered, but genuinely unshaken at your core, you become capable of a level of authenticity that most people only approach in private. You can say what you actually think. You can hold positions under pressure. You can be the same person in every room. This is what earns real respect, not the approval-seeking performance, but the quiet solidity of someone who doesn't require the audience's verdict to know their own value. Shift 3. From personal to impersonal. You take things personally because you have been trained to believe that other people's behavior is primarily about you. Someone is cold, and it means you did something wrong. Someone cancels, and it means they don't value you. Someone criticizes, and it means you are inadequate. Someone succeeds where you struggle, and it means you are falling behind. But almost nothing that happens around you is primarily about you. People are living inside their own overwhelmingly complex inner worlds. Their behavior is shaped by their conditioning, their fears, their unresolved histories, their physical state on a given day, their competing priorities. When someone is rude to you, they are expressing something about their internal weather. When someone rejects you, they are describing their needs, not your value. When someone criticizes you, they are revealing their standards and preferences, not delivering objective assessments of your worth. The shift is the habitual translation of, "What does this mean about me?" into, "What is this revealing about them and about this situation?" It sounds simple. It is not easy. But practiced consistently, it produces a quality of emotional lightness that no amount of positive self-talk can replicate. Shift. 4. From outcome attachment to process investment. Most of your anxiety is outcome anxiety. You are not afraid of the work. You are afraid of the verdict. You are not afraid of trying. You are afraid of finding out what the result says about you. This fear has a logic to it. If your self-worth is tied to the outcome, then every outcome is a referendum on your value. A failed project doesn't just mean the project failed, it means something is wrong with you. A rejected application doesn't just mean this opportunity wasn't the right fit, it means you weren't good enough. The shift is the deliberate, consistent redirection of your satisfaction from outcome to process. You measure success by the quality of what you brought to the effort, not by what the external result confirms about your worth. When you make this shift, something unexpected happens. You become more effective. The fear of failure that once paralyzed your decision-making dissolves because failure no longer carries the same existential weight. You can take risks, learn from setbacks, adjust and re-engage, because none of it is evidence about your fundamental value. It's just information about this particular attempt. Shift 5. From scarcity to abundance. Every desperate, grasping, clinging emotional pattern you have ever experienced is downstream of a single belief. There is not enough. Not enough love available to you. Not enough opportunity. Not enough time. Not enough people who will truly see and accept you. Scarcity thinking produces scarcity behavior, holding on too tightly, acting from desperation, tolerating treatment you should walk away from because somewhere in your nervous system is the conviction that this might be the last chance, that if this relationship ends, no one comparable will appear, that if this opportunity disappears, nothing as good is coming. Abundance thinking is not naive optimism. It is the reasoned recognition that human experience is not a fixed resource game, that the end of one relationship is not the exhaustion of the supply, that a single rejection is not a preview of all future verdicts, that one path closing does not seal all other paths. When you genuinely internalize abundance, your entire behavioral repertoire shifts. You stop pursuing from desperation and start choosing from preference. You stop tolerating what diminishes you from fear of losing something irreplaceable and start asking what actually deserves your investment. Shift. 6. From reactive to deliberate. The reactive life is the default life. Something happens, and you respond automatically, predictably, according to patterns established years before you had any conscious input into their formation. You are, in a very real sense, being operated by your history. The deliberate life requires the ongoing, effortful practice of inserting a pause between stimulus and response, not to suppress the response, not to perform calm, but to briefly occupy the space between what happened and what you do next, and in that space, to consciously select the response that aligns with who you are choosing to be rather than who your past has trained you to default to. This is the most demanding shift on the list. It requires that you remain awake and intentional in moments when the current of emotion is moving fastest. It demands that you catch yourself mid-reaction at exactly the moment when the pull toward the automatic response is strongest. But every time you succeed, the gap widens. Every conscious choice builds the capacity for the next one. Over time, deliberateness becomes a new default, not a constant struggle against the old one, but its gradual replacement, breaking the chains. Philosophy without practice is decoration. The 6 shifts in the previous chapter describe a destination. This chapter gives you the specific tools to start moving. These are not abstract suggestions. They are behavioral protocols, things you can begin today in the situations you will actually face this week. Protocol 1, the pause practice. Between every significant stimulus and your response, there is a gap. Your job is to find it, enter it, and use it. Start with the breath, not as a spiritual practice, though it can become one, but as a purely neurological intervention. A single slow exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the physiological counterweight to the amygdala's alarm response. It begins to lower cortisol levels within seconds. It creates just enough distance from the automatic reaction to allow conscious choice to enter. When you feel the emotional charge beginning to build, the tightening in the chest, the heat behind the eyes, the sudden speeding of thought, this is your cue. Not to suppress what you're feeling, but to slow it down long enough to ask 3 questions. What is actually happening right now as a factual matter? What story am I adding to the factual matter? What response would I choose if I were operating from my best self rather than my most triggered one? These three questions are a complete system. The first separates reality from interpretation. The second identifies where the emotional charge is actually coming from. The third redirects your response toward intention rather than reaction. Protocol 2. Emotional curiosity. Most people treat their emotions the way they treat a car alarm at 3 a.m. As an annoyance to be silenced as quickly as possible. They suppress, distract, reframe, or numb. And because the emotion was never examined, it returns, louder, at a less convenient time. The alternative is curiosity. When a strong emotion arises, instead of immediately managing it, you get interested in it. You treat it the way a skilled investigator treats a piece of evidence, not with judgment, not with urgency, but with genuine attention. What exactly am I feeling? Not the label, the actual physical sensation. Where in my body is it located? What is its texture, its weight, its temperature? Is it moving or still? Then, what is this emotion responding to? Not what I think triggered it, the surface event, but what deeper threat or need is being activated. What old memory does this feel like? What does this emotion want me to do? And is that action actually in my interest? This inquiry doesn't make the emotion disappear, but it transforms your relationship to it. You move from passenger to driver. You gain, incrementally, the capacity to choose what happens next. Protocol 3. Non-engagement. There is a category of interaction designed to pull you into an emotional reaction. The provocative comment, the passive-aggressive communication, the subtle undermining, the manufactured crisis that somehow always requires your immediate emotional engagement. Recognizing these patterns is the first step. The second is learning to simply decline the invitation. Non-engagement is not the same as avoidance. You remain present. You do not pretend the interaction isn't happening. But you do not provide the emotional response it is fishing for. You respond, if at all, from a place of genuine calm. Not performed calm, but actual calm. And you offer nothing that feeds the cycle. This requires practice in low-stakes situations before it becomes available in high-stakes ones. Start noticing the small daily provocations, the unnecessary sarcasm, the small power plays, the testing behavior, and practice meeting them with equanimity rather than engagement. Over time, you will discover that most provocative behavior loses interest when it consistently fails to produce a reaction. Protocol 4. Boundary architecture. A boundary is not a wall, it is a policy. A clearly defined statement, primarily to yourself, about what you will and will not accept, and the consistent behavior that enforces it. Most people do not have emotional boundaries. They have preferences, hopes, and resentments. They want people to treat them differently without having communicated, through consistent behavior rather than words, what different treatment looks like. Boundary architecture begins with identifying clearly and specifically the behaviors that are currently violating your well-being. Not vague categories like people don't respect me, but precise instances. When my time is treated as infinitely available, when my stated preferences are overridden, when conversations consistently move toward experiences that drain rather than replenish me. From that clarity, you determine the specific behavioral response that enforces the boundary. Not an announcement, not a confrontation. A change in your behavior that communicates through action rather than explanation what you will and will not engage with. When the boundary is tested, and it will be, the response is consistent, brief, and unelaborated. No lengthy justification, no apology, no negotiation. The boundary is the boundary, because you decided it should be, and that is sufficient reason. Protocol 5. Self-sourced validation. Every emotional need you currently meet by seeking external input can be partially and eventually substantially met by internal practice. This is not about becoming emotionally self-sufficient in a way that eliminates the need for genuine human connection. It is about ending the dependency that turns other people's behavior into levers that control your inner state. Identify the specific validation you most frequently seek from others. Acknowledgement of your effort, confirmation that you are liked, reassurance that you are not in trouble, evidence that you are seen and valued. Whatever it is, develop a practice of providing it to yourself first. Not as a replacement for genuine connection, but as a foundation that makes you available to connection from a place of choice rather than need. When you complete something difficult, acknowledge it privately, specifically and genuinely, not with empty praise, but with accurate recognition. When you need reassurance, provide yourself with the most honest, supportive assessment you can muster before seeking it from others. When you feel unseen, ask yourself what it would mean to truly see yourself, and then do that. This practice is slow. It doesn't feel dramatic, but it is among the most genuinely transformative things you can do because it gradually shifts the location of your self-worth from outside to inside, from a place you cannot control to the only place you ever could. Building emotional armor. There is a version of strength that the world misunderstands almost completely. Most people equate emotional strength with emotional absence, the person who never flinches, never feels, never shows the impact of what lands on them. This is not strength. This is performance, and it is exhausting. Real emotional armor is built from something entirely different. It is built from the capacity to feel the full weight of an experience, the rejection, the criticism, the loss, the disappointment, and to remain, through all of it, fundamentally intact. Not unaffected, intact. The distinction matters more than most people realize. The person who avoids pain is not strong. They are just not yet in a situation painful enough to expose their fragility. The person who can move through pain without being shattered by it, that is armor. That is genuine resilience. The first layer of armor is self-worth that is independent of external events. Think of your self-worth as either a fixed sum or a variable one. Most people operate with variable self-worth. It rises with success and approval, falls with failure and rejection. This makes them vulnerable to everyone and everything, because anything that happens can be interpreted as evidence in the ongoing trial of their value. Fixed self-worth doesn't mean you're impervious to feedback. It means that the fundamental assessment of your worth as a human being is not on the table. You can acknowledge failure without concluding you are a failure. You can accept criticism without concluding you are what the criticism describes. You can experience rejection without it renegotiating your fundamental understanding of your own value. This layer is built slowly, through deliberate and consistent internal work. But the foundation is a single recognition. Your existence is not a test you can fail. Your value was not something assigned to you based on your performance, and it cannot be revoked by poor reviews. The second layer is the discipline of thought management. Your mind will generate approximately 60,000 thoughts today. The overwhelming majority of them will be recycled, replays of past events, projections of future scenarios, commentary on the commentary. Most of these thoughts are not helping you. They are simply happening, and in their happening, they are consuming energy and generating emotional experience. Thought management is not thought suppression. It is the practice of recognizing that a thought is an event, not a directive. It arrived. It does not require action. It does not require belief. It does not require your emotional engagement. You can observe it the way you observe weather, noting its presence without being required to live inside it. As you develop this practice, you begin to notice the specific categories of thought that most reliably drain your armor. The catastrophizing thought that converts a current difficulty into a permanent disaster. The comparative thought that measures your inner experience against other people's visible performance. The self-critical thought that interrogates your worth using standards you would never apply to anyone you love. These thoughts are not enemies to be destroyed. They are signals to be interpreted. And then, if they are not serving you, gently redirected. The third layer is the capacity for selective vulnerability. Armor is not meant to keep everyone out. It is meant to give you the power to choose who comes in. Most people operate at one of two extremes, either overexposing themselves to anyone who expresses interest or closing themselves off so completely that no genuine connection is possible. Both positions are fear-based. Both are reactions to having been hurt by misplaced trust. Selective vulnerability is the middle path. You learn to distinguish between people who have demonstrated, through consistent behavior over time, not through promises or warmth or intensity, the trustworthiness required to hold your inner world carefully, and everyone else receives an appropriate, genuine version of you that doesn't include your most delicate architecture. This is not deception. It is wisdom about where to invest what is most precious. Strategic indifference. Here is a truth that will feel controversial until it doesn't. You are not obligated to care about everything. In fact, caring about everything equally is a guaranteed path to caring about nothing effectively. Your emotional energy is not unlimited. Your attention is finite. The capacity to be genuinely moved, genuinely present, genuinely invested, these are resources. And, like all resources, they are depleted when spread too thin and most powerful when concentrated. The most effective human beings you will ever encounter are not people who care intensely about everything. They are people who care deeply about a small number of things and have learned, deliberately, not through indifference but through conscious curation, to remain largely unmoved by everything else. This is strategic indifference. And it is one of the most underrated emotional skills in existence. Strategic indifference is not apathy. The apathetic person doesn't care because they've given up. The strategically indifferent person doesn't engage because they've chosen not to, based on a clear assessment of what deserves their inner resources and what does not. To practice it, you need a personal hierarchy of what actually matters. At the top, your health, your genuine relationships, your growth, your purpose-aligned work, your core values. These receive your full presence, your deepest investment, your most careful attention. Below that, things that affect you significantly but don't define you. Temporary difficulties, minor relationship friction, professional setbacks, financial challenges. These receive your problem-solving attention, focused, practical, time-limited, but not your identity or your peace. At the bottom, and this is the category that destroys most people's well-being, the vast noise of social opinion, comparative judgment, random criticism, and the invisible audience most people spend their entire lives performing for. These receive nothing, no internal real estate, no recurring mental occupancy, no emotional response beyond brief acknowledgement and deliberate release. Most people have this hierarchy completely inverted. They spend their deepest emotional energy on what others think, and their shallowest attention on what actually matters. The result is a life that feels permanently urgent and permanently unfulfilling, full of activity, empty of meaning. The recalibration of this hierarchy is not a one-time act. It is a continuous practice. Every day you will encounter stimuli designed, intentionally and unintentionally, to pull your emotional engagement toward the unimportant. The social media feed engineered for outrage and comparison, the conversation seeded with subtle provocations, the environment of competitive performance that measures your worth in metrics you never agreed to be measured by. Strategic indifference is your resistance practice. It is the daily choice to direct your attention intentionally rather than allowing it to be captured by whatever is loudest. Begin with the basic audit. For one day, notice every instance in which you experience an emotional response. Don't judge it. Just notice. A slight irritation at a traffic delay, a quiet anxiety triggered by someone's success, a flash of defensiveness when a comment lands in a way that stings, a small wave of inadequacy scrolling past someone's highlight reel. Now ask, does engaging with this emotion serve me or my actual priorities in any way? If the answer is no, and it will be no far more often than you expect, the practice is to acknowledge the response and consciously return your attention to what actually matters, not suppression, redirection. The acknowledgement prevents the buildup of unexpressed emotion. The redirection is the practice of sovereignty. Over time, this rewires the default. The provocative stimulus that once reliably captured your engagement begins to arrive with diminishing return, not because you've gone numb, but because you've genuinely reorganized your values, and the things that once seemed important in the low-level ambient way have simply stopped seeming important. There is a particularly powerful application of strategic indifference. Learning to be permanently, comfortably, unbothered by other people's disapproval. This is the superpower that most people circle their entire lives without ever acquiring. The capacity to know that someone, perhaps many people, disapprove of you, disagree with your choices, misunderstand your intentions, or simply don't like you as a person, and to carry that knowledge without it altering your internal weather. The fear of disapproval is one of the most ancient human fears. In tribal prehistory, social rejection carried survival stakes. Exclusion from the group could mean death. The brain still processes disapproval through that ancient emergency framework, which is why it feels so visceral, so physical, so urgent. But the emergency is no longer real. The disapproval of people whose lives are minimally connected to yours carries no actual consequence for your survival, your worth, or your trajectory, unless you grant it that power. And you don't have to. Practice small acts of deliberate exposure. Share an opinion you normally keep private, and allow the responses to be whatever they are, without emotional management. Make a choice that you know will disappoint someone, and allow them to be disappointed without rushing to explain or justify. Remain in the discomfort of being misunderstood for long enough to discover that you survive it completely. Each exposure is evidence. Evidence that the thing you feared, the judgment, the disapproval, the misunderstanding, is survivable. And over time, what is survivable stops being frightening. Reclaiming your energy. Your energy is the most irreplaceable currency you have. Every other resource, time, money, attention, creativity, is downstream of it. When your energy is depleted, everything suffers. When your energy is full and focused, everything becomes possible. And yet most people treat their energy the way people in a prosperity delusion treat their savings, giving it freely to whoever presents an immediate request without any sustained consideration of what the total investment is buying them. The single largest drain on human emotional energy is not hard work. It is not difficulty, setbacks, or demanding circumstances. It is the constant low-grade effort of managing, monitoring, and responding to the emotional states of people who were never your responsibility to manage. You absorbed this responsibility gradually through the same conditioning that built your cage. You learned that when the people around you were okay, you were safe. When they were not okay, something was required of you. Over time, other people's emotional states became a form of environmental threat, and your nervous system learned to continuously monitor them, not out of love, but out of something that learned to disguise itself as love. The result is that you arrive at the end of a day having done very little of particular difficulty and feeling like you've run a marathon. Because you have been running a marathon through the interior landscape of other people's emotions, needs, moods, and reactions. The energy audit is the beginning of reclamation. For 1 week, keep a simple running record. Not an elaborate system, just brief notes throughout the day. After spending time with different people, rate your energy, replenished, neutral, or depleted. After different activities, the same. After different environments, the same. By the end of the week, patterns will be visible that you've always sensed but never confirmed in writing. Certain people consistently take energy and return nothing to the tank. Certain activities dissolve your focus and leave you feeling hollow. Certain environments, particular social situations, media inputs, professional dynamics, systematically drain your reserves in ways that compound over time. This awareness is not an invitation to abandon every draining relationship or situation immediately. Life involves some irreducible friction, but it is an invitation to begin making conscious choices rather than default ones. To decide where your energy goes rather than discover, at the end of each week, that it was taken. Protecting your energy begins with the simple, radical practice of saying no. Not the apologetic, over-explained no that immediately triggers guilt and the impulse to compensate. The clean, direct, unelaborated no. The no that is complete in itself, that does not require the support of a sufficient reason to stand. Most people cannot access this no because they believe, at a deep, pre-verbal level, that they are obligated to be available to everyone who requests their presence, time, or emotional attention. This belief is not a moral position. It is a fear response. Specifically, the fear that setting a limit will be experienced as rejection, and that rejection will carry consequences they cannot afford. The only way to discover the belief is false is to test it. Say the no. Allow the other person's response to be whatever it is, and notice that you survived. Notice that the relationship, if it is genuine, survived. Notice that the predicted catastrophe did not arrive. Energy reclamation also requires a particular kind of relationship with your phone and with the digital ecosystem more broadly. The modern social media environment is an attention extraction system. It is designed with considerable sophistication and enormous resources to capture your focus, trigger your emotional responses, and keep you engaged. The anxiety, outrage, comparison, and inadequacy it reliably produces are not bugs. They are features. They keep you scrolling. Every hour spent in reactive, emotionally agitated consumption of content that doesn't serve your actual life is an hour of irreplaceable energy gone. Not just time, energy. The quality of your thinking, your presence, your capacity for genuine connection, your ability to do the deep work that actually moves your life forward. This is not an argument for digital abstinence. It is an argument for digital intentionality. You decide, in advance, what this medium is for and what it is not for. You use it as a tool rather than submitting to it as an environment. And when it begins pulling you into the reactive, comparative, emotionally agitated state it is designed to create, you close it. The energy this returns to you is extraordinary. Mastering difficult people. They are everywhere, and in every life there are moments when you cannot simply exit the situation. The colleague who turns every meeting into an exercise in subtle undermining. The family member who arrives with the specific ability to find the precise emotional wound and press it until your composure shatters. The acquaintance who performs warmth to your face and something quite different behind your back. The person, in whatever form they take in your life, who leaves every interaction with more of your energy than they arrived with. Difficult people have power over you only through one mechanism: your emotional reaction. Remove the reaction, truly, not as performance, but as genuine internal state, and the mechanism collapses. You become, from their perspective, remarkably uninteresting to destabilize. This is not the goal. The goal is not to win a game against them. The goal is to protect your internal climate from being determined by someone else's dysfunction. Understanding the psychology of difficult behavior is the first step. Almost without exception, the behaviors most commonly experienced as difficult: manipulation, passive aggression, emotional volatility, persistent boundary violations, relentless negativity, are not strategies directed at you specifically. They are the predictable outputs of a person operating from significant emotional pain, deep insecurity, or the accumulated habits of someone who never developed healthier tools for getting their needs met. The manipulator is usually someone who learned, early, that direct request doesn't work, that the only way to get what they need is through indirect influence. The chronic critic is often someone whose internal self-criticism is so relentless that it overflows outward. The drama creator is frequently someone whose emotional intensity has never found a regulated channel and therefore expresses itself as constant interpersonal crisis. None of this makes their behavior acceptable. Understanding its roots does not require you to accept it, but it depersonalizes it. And depersonalization is the first step toward immunity. The key skills for navigating difficult people: emotional neutrality in the presence of provocation. When someone is attempting, consciously or otherwise, to destabilize your composure, the most powerful response available to you is genuine calmness, not theatrical patience, not the tight-jawed performance of someone suppressing an explosion. Actual calm built from actual internal stability. This calm communicates something the provocateur is not expecting, that their actions are not producing the intended result. Most difficult behavior is, at its core, a search for a certain kind of response. Deny the response, and you remove most of the incentive to continue. The minimal response technique. When engaged with someone who feeds on elaboration, justification, and extended explanation, give them as little as the situation requires. Short, non-reactive responses, no self-justification, no counter-accusations, no extensive explanation of your reasoning, a boundary, stated once, clearly, without the anxious elaboration that invites negotiation. The principle of non-rescue. Many difficult people present their situations as emergencies that require your immediate emotional involvement. They have crises, real and manufactured, that position you as the solution. Selective empathy is the response. Genuine care for their situation, without the assumption that their distress is your responsibility to eliminate. You can acknowledge someone's pain without adopting it. You can be compassionate without being consumed. The long game of withdrawal. When difficult behavior persists despite clear limits, the most effective response is often not confrontation, but gradual, consistent reduction of access. Less time, less emotional disclosure, less availability for the specific dynamics that drain you. Not as punishment, as self-protection. And when the situation is genuinely toxic, consistently abusive, reliably manipulative, structurally incompatible with your well-being, the skill required is not better management of the dynamic, but the clarity to recognize that some situations do not improve and some relationships do not deserve the continued investment of your most limited resource. The sovereign life. There is a way of moving through the world that most people have glimpsed only briefly, in certain rare moments of genuine clarity, or in the company of people who seem to carry something invisible and extraordinarily attractive, a quality of presence, an unforced ease, an authority that doesn't require assertion because it isn't threatened by challenges to it. This quality has a name: emotional sovereignty. It is not confidence in the conventional sense, not the performance of assurance, not the competence-based calm of someone who has mastered their field. It is something prior to and deeper than all of that. It is the condition of a person whose inner life is genuinely their own, not shaped by the moment's social pressure, not responsive to the invisible demands of approval-seeking, not hostage to other people's emotional weather. The sovereign life is not an absence of emotion. It is the full presence of emotion within a self that is no longer defined by what it feels. Radical responsibility is the entry point. The sovereign life begins with a decision that most people resist for years, the decision to stop explaining your emotional state as something that happens to you and start recognizing it as something you participate in creating. This is not a comfortable reframe. It strips the comfort of the victim position. And the victim position, for all its suffering, does offer something. It removes responsibility. If my misery is caused by what others did, I don't have to take the harder step of examining my own responses, my own habits, my own interpretive defaults. Radical responsibility does not mean that others' behavior doesn't affect you. Of course it does. It means that your response to that behavior, its depth, its duration, its impact on your life, is something you have far more influence over than the victim position allows you to claim. This single recognition changes everything. If you participated in creating the emotional experience, you can participate in changing it. The locus of power shifts from out there, from whoever or whatever triggered you, to in here, where your actual life is lived. Outcome independence is the practical expression of sovereignty. You pursue what matters to you. You bring your full effort, your genuine investment, your real care to the endeavor, and you release attachment to the specific form the outcome takes. This is not resignation. It is not passivity. It is not the absence of wanting things to go well. It is the clear-eyed recognition that effort is within your domain, and outcome is not entirely, and that tying your well-being to the latter makes you permanently dependent on factors that will always be partially beyond your reach. Outcome independence makes risk-taking possible, makes authentic expression possible, makes genuine commitment possible, the kind that doesn't flinch from the possibility of failure because failure is no longer evidence about your worth. Selective engagement is sovereignty in practice. The sovereign person chooses where to be fully present and where to maintain appropriate distance. They do not scatter their authentic self across every interaction equally, not from withholding but from the recognition that genuine presence is a resource and should be invested where it is valued, where it will be received well, and where it genuinely serves. In every domain of your life, relationships, professional settings, social environments, practice the deliberate identification of where your full presence is both appropriate and valuable. And everywhere else, practice being genuinely present in the limited, role-appropriate sense that the situation calls for, without the compulsion to be seen, understood, validated, or approved of. The liberation this produces is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The exhaustion of being always on, always performing, always monitoring, always seeking, lifts in a way that reveals how much energy it was consuming. The silence of not needing something from every interaction has its own quality. a spaciousness, a rest. Impermanence is the foundation of sovereign peace. Nothing that is currently causing you distress will last in precisely its current form. This is not consolation speak. It is structural fact. Circumstances change, relationships evolve. Problems that feel permanent reveal themselves over time to be temporary configurations of temporary factors. The acute pain of today's rejection, today's failure, today's loss, real and valid, will be processed, integrated, and transformed into something that carries less charge. And the part that requires equal attention, nothing that is currently bringing you satisfaction will last in precisely its current form either. The success, the relationship, the period of ease, these too are temporary, not to be grasped at with the desperation that turns enjoyment into anxiety, but to be inhabited fully with the particular quality of presence that comes from knowing this moment is this moment and nothing else. When you genuinely inhabit impermanence, when it moves from intellectual concept to lived reality, the quality of both suffering and pleasure changes. Suffering becomes more bearable because you know it is moving. Pleasure becomes more vivid because you are no longer taking it for granted. This is the foundation of inner peace, not the elimination of difficulty, not the guarantee of positive outcomes. The capacity to move through all of it, the highs and the lows, the welcomed and the devastating, from a centered, grounded self that remains essentially intact regardless of the weather. Detachment in relationships. Here is a paradox that takes most people years to fully inhabit. The less you need from a relationship, the more it can give you. Neediness, the specific quality of emotional desperation that positions the other person as the primary source of your worth, your security, and your sense of being acceptable, does not produce love. It produces a dynamic in which the other person becomes responsible for something they cannot sustainably provide, and in which the relationship exists primarily as a coping mechanism rather than a genuine connection between two people who choose each other. Detached relationships are built differently. They are built by two people who bring their full selves to the connection. Not half-selves desperately searching for completion, but whole selves who have their own lives, their own sources of meaning, their own capacity for happiness, and choose to share it. This is not coldness. This is the warmest kind of love, because it is love that doesn't require the other person to be something other than who they are. It doesn't need them to never disappoint, never leave, never disagree, never have a bad day. It doesn't hold them hostage to the role of managing your emotional survival. It sees them clearly as they actually are and chooses them from that clarity. The principle of maintained identity in relationship. The pattern of losing yourself in love is so common it has been romanticized. The idea that true love means complete merging, that the deepest relationships dissolve the boundary between self and other. This is one of the most damaging myths in the culture of romantic love. When you lose yourself in a relationship, when your interests, friendships, sense of humor, personal aspirations, and independent inner life are progressively reorganized around another person, you create a dependency that is dangerous for both parties, dangerous for you because your self disappears, dangerous for the other person because they have become, without necessarily wanting to be, responsible for the entire edifice of your identity and worth. Healthy relationships require that both people maintain the interior richness of a life that extends beyond the relationship. Your own interests that fascinate you independent of whether your partner shares them, your own friendships that sustain you, your own trajectory that continues to move regardless of what is happening between you and another person. This is not distance. This is the very thing that makes sustained intimacy possible, the ongoing presence of a full person rather than the diminishing presence of someone who has given themselves away. Emotional non-absorption in partnership. The most common form of relationship suffering is not dramatic. It is not betrayal or catastrophic conflict. It is the steady, daily leakage of one person's emotional weather into the other's. One partner wakes anxious, and by noon both are anxious. One arrives home depleted, and within the hour the household is heavy. One is pulled toward worry, and the relationship becomes a vessel of shared worry. The skill of emotional non-absorption is the ability to be genuinely present with your partner's experience without adopting it as your own. You can hear about their difficulty without becoming distressed by it. You can be with them in their anxiety without absorbing the anxiety into your own body. You can offer genuine warmth and attention without the osmotic transfer of their state into yours. This is one of the deepest gifts you can give in a relationship. The presence of someone who remains genuinely stable, not indifferent, but stable. While you move through difficulty is enormously valuable. It provides a ground to return to. It communicates, without words, that the situation is survivable, that the person you love can hold their center while you are temporarily displaced from yours. Boundaries in love. The idea that love means no limits is another piece of damaging cultural mythology. In reality, the absence of limits in a relationship doesn't produce freedom. It produces enmeshment, where the needs, emotions, and choices of both people are so entangled that neither person has genuine autonomy. Boundaries in love are not barriers. They are the structures that make sustained, genuine connection possible. They are the clarity about where you end and another person begins. The recognition that their emotions are theirs to work with, their decisions are theirs to make, and their growth is theirs to do, while yours belongs to you. Setting limits in a loving relationship about how you will and will not be spoken to, about the kinds of conversations you will and will not engage in, about what you are and are not available to carry on someone else's behalf, is not withholding love. It is the practice of love that is sustainable because it doesn't require either person to disappear. Professional detachment. You will spend, if you follow current statistical patterns, somewhere between a quarter and a third of your waking life at work. The quality of your professional emotional life is not a minor variable. It is a defining feature of the quality of your life as a whole. And yet most people bring into their professional environment the same emotional patterns that make their personal lives difficult. The need for their boss's approval, the sensitivity to colleagues' judgment, the identity investment in outcomes, the tendency to personalize dynamics that are about organizational pressures rather than personal assessments. Professional detachment is not about doing less than your best. It is not about caring less or performing below your capabilities. It is about separating what you genuinely can influence, the quality of your work, the integrity of your conduct, the authenticity of your contribution, from the labyrinth of politics, perception management, and social dynamics that exists in every professional environment and is almost entirely outside your actual control. Your job is not your identity. This statement is simple, and its implications are radical. When you are what you do for a living, career setbacks become existential events. A poor performance review is not feedback about your work. It is a verdict on your worth. Being overlooked for a promotion is not a business decision shaped by 100 factors you cannot see. It is evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. The de-identification of self from career doesn't reduce your investment in your work. It frees your investment. You can bring more of yourself, more creativity, more honest contribution, more genuine expression, to work when the work is what you do rather than who you are, because failure no longer carries existential weight. Receiving feedback without self-erosion. Feedback, including negative feedback, unfair feedback, and criticism delivered without the grace it deserved, is data about how your work is being perceived from a particular vantage point at a particular moment. Nothing more. It is not a character verdict. It is not a permanent assessment. It is one person's view, shaped by their perspective and their context, which may be accurate or inaccurate, useful or not. The professional detachment skill is to receive feedback with genuine openness to whatever is accurate in it, including the uncomfortable parts, while maintaining the clear-eyed recognition that the feedback is not the same thing as the truth about you. You extract what is useful. You set aside what is not. You continue. Setting professional limits without apology. The inability to say no in professional settings is one of the most widespread forms of self-betrayal in contemporary work life. The accumulation of obligations beyond your capacity to fulfill them. The acceptance of treatment you would not accept in any other context. The chronic overextension that erodes the quality of everything you do. Professional limits about your hours, your boundaries of responsibility, the treatment you will accept, are not evidence of insufficient commitment. They are the conditions under which genuinely excellent work is possible. And communicating them clearly without the extended justification that reveals your discomfort with having them is a form of professional integrity. Crisis proof. The true test of every skill described in this book is not the ordinary day. It is the day that ordinary doesn't cover. The day the call comes that changes the arrangement of your life. The day the thing you were counting on disappears. The day you discover that the situation you thought was stable was not. Crisis is not the exception to human experience. It is a recurring feature of it, and how you move through crisis, not how you prevent it, because that is largely not within your power, determines the texture of your life as meaningfully as anything else. Most people approach crisis with 3 responses, all of which compound the difficulty. The first is shock, the genuine inability to integrate information that conflicts sharply with an existing model of how things are. The second is catastrophizing, the mental extension of the current difficulty into permanent total disaster. The third is desperation, the willingness to do things they would not ordinarily do, to make commitments they cannot sustain, to abandon standards they would otherwise keep in exchange for the immediate relief of uncertainty. Emotional detachment offers a different architecture for crisis, not the elimination of the experience. You will still feel it, and feeling it is appropriate, but a way of moving through it that preserves your capacity to think clearly, make wise decisions, maintain your core integrity, and emerge, eventually not merely having survived, but having been shaped by the experience in ways that serve you. The first tool is the crisis separation. When a significant difficulty arrives, your nervous system immediately attempts to expand it, to merge the specific problem with everything adjacent to it, creating a totality of threat that feels overwhelming. The professional setback triggers fears about financial security, which activates anxiety about relationships, which spirals into questions about fundamental adequacy. The crisis separation is the deliberate practice of isolating the actual problem from the associations it has activated. What specifically has changed? What specific decisions does this change require? What is the actual situation separated from all the stories the situation is triggering? This separation is not denial, it is precision, and precision is the precondition for effective response. The second tool is the locus of control inventory. In any crisis situation, some factors are within your influence, and some are entirely beyond it. Most people in crisis spend the majority of their energy on the latter, obsessing over what might happen, trying to control outcomes that aren't controllable, attempting to manage other people's responses to the situation. The locus of control inventory is a brief, structured exercise in honesty. What specifically can I influence here? What is genuinely beyond my reach? Write it if you can. Separating these two categories on paper removes the mental energy spent on the impossible and focuses it entirely on the possible. Then, what is the single most important action available to me right now, given what I can actually influence? One action, not a comprehensive plan for resolving everything. One next step. In crisis, the compass only needs to point 1 degree ahead. The third tool is temporal perspective. When you are inside a crisis, it expands to fill your entire perceptual horizon. It feels total and permanent. The mind loses access to the full dimension of time and treats the current moment as though it defines the permanent reality. Temporal perspective is the deliberate act of situating the current difficulty in a longer timeline, not to minimize it. Some crises are genuinely serious and should not be minimized, but to restore the mind's access to the dimension it has temporarily lost. This will move, not necessarily in the way you want it to, not necessarily back to what existed before, but it will not be exactly this intensity forever. This is not consolation, it is accuracy. And accuracy, even when uncomfortable, is a more stable ground to operate from than the distorted perception of total, permanent disaster. The fourth tool is growth orientation. In every genuine crisis, there is a question that most people are too deep in survival mode to ask. What is this making available that wasn't available before? Not every crisis contains an obvious gift. Some crises are simply losses of health, of people, of things that mattered and cannot be replaced. To insist on finding a silver lining in every dark cloud is its own form of emotional dishonesty. But many crises do create conditions for change that stable periods do not. The disruption of a comfortable but unfulfilling career. The end of a relationship that had become a container for patterns that weren't serving either person. The health scare that finally makes a person take seriously what they knew they needed to address. The financial difficulty that forces a re-examination of values and priorities that had become invisible through habit. The question is not whether the crisis was good. It wasn't. The question is whether, given that it has arrived, you will move through it in a way that leaves you with more than you brought. More self-knowledge, more resilience, more clarity about what actually matters, more capacity for the next difficulty that inevitably follows. The daily architecture of freedom. Emotional detachment is not a destination, it is a practice, a daily, ongoing, unfinished practice that deepens over time but never arrives at completion. This is not a discouragement. It is the truth that makes it worth pursuing, because a practice that is always unfinished is always alive. There is always another layer of attachment to examine, another reflex to retrain, another situation that reveals how much further there is to grow. The daily architecture of freedom is the set of consistent habits and practices that make emotional sovereignty a lived reality rather than an aspiration. Morning intention setting. The first 20 minutes of your day are neuroscientifically significant. Before the day's demands have activated your reactive patterns, there is a window of genuine openness in which the day's emotional tone can be intentionally set rather than reactively discovered. Use this window deliberately, not with a rigid script, but with a genuine private inquiry. Who do I intend to be today? Not what do I intend to accomplish? The task list is already accessible. Who do I intend to be in the moments when what is asked of me conflicts with my comfort? What is the quality of presence I want to bring? How do I want to respond when someone tries to destabilize me? This intention setting is not a guarantee. You will have difficult moments, regardless, but you will enter them having already, in some sense, decided who you are, and that prior decision is a resource in the moment when the automatic reaction is pulling hardest. The midday check-in, twice during the course of an ordinary day, not during extraordinary moments when it's obvious that an emotional recalibration is needed, but during the unremarkable middle sections. Pause for 60 seconds and ask, where is my attention right now? What is my emotional state? Is this state something I am choosing or something that is happening to me? This practice sounds trivial. Its effects are not. The act of regular self-monitoring creates a quality of ongoing awareness that gradually transforms the relationship between you and your emotional life. You begin to notice patterns, the time of day when your resistance is lowest, the categories of interaction that most reliably drain you, the specific triggers that reliably produce reactions out of proportion to their cause. This awareness is not the same as change, but it is the precondition for change. You cannot redirect what you cannot see. Deliberate exposure to discomfort. The emotional detachment skills described throughout this book are built through practice, and practice requires exposure. You cannot become comfortable with disapproval by avoiding disapproval. You cannot develop non-reaction by avoiding provocation. You cannot build the capacity for uncertainty tolerance by ensuring that every day unfolds as expected. Each week, identify one small, deliberate practice of exposure. Share something you believe in that you normally keep quiet because of how it might be received. Allow a process that matters to you to unfold without intervention for longer than is comfortable. Stay in an awkward social moment longer than your anxiety wants you to before rescuing yourself. These are deliberate micro-challenges. Each one, completed without the catastrophe you anticipated, is deposited as evidence. Evidence that the thing you feared was survivable. Evidence that your tolerance for discomfort is larger than your anxiety projected. Evidence that you are more resilient than the most frightened version of yourself believes. Evening integration. At the end of each day, 5 minutes of honest, non-judgmental review. Not a performance evaluation, not a catalog of failures. An honest, curious inquiry. When today did I operate from my values and who I am choosing to be? When did I fall back into automatic patterns? What triggered those patterns? What does that suggest about where to direct practice tomorrow? The evening review is the learning mechanism that converts experience into growth. Without it, you can have the same day 1,000 times and extract no cumulative wisdom from it. With it, each day is a slightly refined iteration of a practice that is always moving toward greater freedom. Environment curation. You are not the only force shaping your mind. Your environment, the information you consume, the people you spend time with, the physical spaces you inhabit, the digital feeds you allow access, is continuously, powerfully, often invisibly, shaping the neural patterns that determine your default emotional states. Most people build their environment by default, accepting whatever inputs are offered, spending time with whoever is available, consuming whatever appears in the feed. Then they wonder why their emotional defaults don't change, why they keep returning to the same patterns despite their genuine desire to be different. Intentional environment curation is the recognition that you are, to a significant extent, the average of what you consistently absorb. The books, the conversations, the media, the people, these are not neutral inputs. They are shaping material. Choose them accordingly. The person, your becoming something, has been happening to you as you have moved through these pages. It may have been subtle, a slight loosening of something that had been held tightly for a long time. Or it may have felt more significant, a recognition arriving in chapters 3 or 8 or 12 that something you have been treating as a fixed feature of your personality is actually a learned pattern, and that learned patterns can be unlearned. Either way, you are not the same person who read the opening pages of this book, not because of anything I have told you, but because understanding changes you, recognition changes you. The moment you see a pattern clearly, from a position of genuine clarity rather than the inside of it, you are already partially outside it. This is the beginning, what the transformed emotional life looks like in practice. Your relationships change, not because the people in them have changed, though some may in response to the changed version of you, but because you bring different needs and different capacities to them. You are no longer desperately seeking validation from your partner and therefore genuinely available to know and love them. You are no longer managing your parents' expectations of you and therefore able to be present with them as people rather than as mirrors of your adequacy. You are no longer performing for your friends and therefore able to be genuinely known. Your professional life changes. You take the risk you've been circling for 3 years because failure has lost its power to define you. You say the honest thing in the meeting because approval-seeking no longer owns your voice. You leave the situation that was diminishing you because your identity is no longer embedded in the role it provided. Your internal life changes most profoundly of all. The constant low-level noise of self-monitoring, social scanning, approval-seeking, and image management quiets, not to silence, because you are human, but to a level that leaves enormous amounts of cognitive and emotional space previously occupied. In that space, clarity, creativity, the particular quality of attention that comes from being genuinely present rather than perpetually performing. The question that remains. Every page of this book has pointed toward a single fundamental reorientation, the movement of your locus of emotional authority from outside to inside, from other people's responses to your own internal compass, from the shifting, uncontrollable territory of external approval to the stable, cultivatable territory of self-knowledge and internal validation. This movement is not a one-time event. It is a direction you can choose or not choose every single day. The people who live in genuine emotional freedom are not people who were born different from you. They are people who made this choice, to take responsibility for their inner world, to do the work of developing the skills described in these pages, to face the discomfort of breaking patterns that were familiar and painful rather than unfamiliar and possible, and who made it again the next day and the day after that. You have everything you need. The understanding is here. The tools are here. The only remaining question is whether you are ready to use them. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, not in a way that produces immediate, comfortable, linear progress, but consistently, with genuine commitment to the version of yourself that is already, at some level, waiting for you to arrive, the data your emotions are trying to give you. Throughout this book, we have moved steadily away from the view of emotions as commands, as unquestionable directives that must be obeyed, reactions that must be expressed, responses that must be validated by external confirmation, and toward the view of emotions as information, signals from your nervous system about what is happening in your interior world and what it might need. Fear is not a verdict about your inadequacy. It is information that your system has identified a potential threat and would like you to pay attention. Anger is not a justification for destructive behavior. It is information that something important to you has been crossed and that a response may be warranted. Grief is not weakness. It is information that you loved something deeply enough to feel its absence as a genuine loss. When you Receive your emotions as data rather than surrendering to them as commands. You gain access to all the information they contain while retaining the agency to decide what to do with it. You become, in the truest sense, the person in charge of your own life. This is emotional sovereignty. This is what you were always capable of. This is what you have been building, page by page, throughout the reading of this book. The question is no longer whether you can do it. The question is what you do next.